First of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the Witchcraft. We are very pleased to have Margo Burns, who was the project manager and associate editor for Records of Salem Witchcraft. And otherwise, you've already met because you've been here.
What's my blood type?
And I'll give it over to you.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you for coming out tonight. This is one of my favorite things to do is to talk about documents. So if you like document preservation, I'm telling you, wait till you see what they did to these documents over the years. To do Records of Salem Witch Hunt, we went through all of the extant legal papers from the Salem witchcraft trials in 1692 and 1693. So I became very familiar with the texts in all of them because we were transcribing them in painful detail, just for describing what was on the actual pieces of paper. So if there was a stray mark or this is kind of weird, we put it in there. So in some cases, it's a little harder to read them because you have to go, what is that? Oh, okay. But if you pull out the images of them, then you can say, oh, okay, I can see this. There are a few other books that will give you modernized versions. Richard Godbeer has a little teeny volume that has some modernized ones, but he only does 7 cases. So that's okay, but we were looking at them very, very carefully for the content. And then I said, let's look at where they have been. Because there have been a bunch of different places, and probably most recently people know about them moving from Salem to Rowley, and that caused a little uproar. So I decided, where have they been? And right now, turn on off, switch to on position. Just about all of them are in the Massachusetts Archives. Oh, same bow tie, same. Well, this is the one. Just anyway, so the Massachusetts Archives, where they should be. And last summer I was down there with a group of people from Endicott College. They had a special seminar for middle school and high school teachers, and they brought them to this area and they did everything. They did stuff about the Crucible and stuff, but I had a half day with them at the archives, and I had them pull all sorts of documents. So they were working with real primary source documents. It was awesome. I think they liked it too, but I was probably geeking out more than anyone. You know, I get to show people, talk to people about these things. So this came out in January 2023. They moved from the Phillips Library at Peabody Essex Museum to the Massachusetts Archives, actually the Judicial Archives that are housed there, where they should be. And they should have been there all along, but I think they've been left in the Essex County Courthouse out of deference to Salem. A lot of people had complained that the Peabody Essex Museum had not really been, even though they were being held there, they weren't really doing things about Salem, and they were leaving it to the Witch Museum, and it was hoo-hoo. But now, if you past few years, they have a whole lot. And this is at the Phillips Library website, and you can actually go to all of those different things, and they will show you which documents were exhibited on which one. So here we go. This is the first one. Clearly COVID. I came down for it. Can you see there are people in line, you know, 6. So this is the first one. And this was just like, yeah, finally they're showing some of the documents. And then every year, this is 2021, 2022, 2023, and that's the one that was just up but it's taken down, and now they have an ongoing exhibit, which they probably should have had all along. But, okay. Now, all of this was leading, all this mess about where the documents were. I ran into this on the door of the Phillips Library just down the street, and they were closing it. And I found this on their website. When they're going to be closing it, the fact that they would move things to an off-site location, and then they were going to be back, but they didn't tell you the dates. And people were getting a little anxious. We were very glad that our book came out before they closed things, because we really liked coming in and getting it. However, there were people who were not happy. This is one of the early pictures of it. And there are people protesting. And if you're from Salem, you may know some of these people. I will not name them. And then there were buttons. Do you remember those?
No, I wish I could have.
I ran across one of mine recently and forgot to put it aside for this. So, and it didn't go well. as a PR thing. Why are they doing it? Salem hacks, you know. So people were not happy in general because where they were going was going to be in Rowley for this big collection center, which a museum the size of Peabody Essex need. They need stuff that will be humidity and temperature controlled because they didn't have a rock room. And they were moving all of them there. And people were not happy. I will say, support of the move? No, it allowed them to reprocess all their collections in Phillips Library. There's just so much material. And it turns out, I was talking to one of the librarians who'd been there before, and she said, yeah, there were like 3 or 4 cataloging systems in their collections, and it was really hard to find things. And also the Phillips Library, there were several levels, and there was an elevator, and it was just really hard to manage it. But when they moved to a place in Peabody, they had this gigantic 1 floor, and they could put everything on 1 floor, and they had things with wheels. So they were able to arrange everything, move things around, and give it a consistent cataloging control. So it was very helpful for them to do that and have a place that they could do that before they moved into the other center. But people weren't happy. And they were so unhappy that Dan Monroe, they went to the whole atrium at the Peabody Essex Museum, and there's Dan Monroe talking to people who are not happy with him. And a couple of the other people that were there, and they have pictures of what where the Phillips Library, what it was going to look like. That was great. But the coverage, they say, he said it was nonsense. You know, it's bound up in it. No, nonsense. Well, that is the quote. This is the quote from him. History doesn't reside in a specific state to a specific set of documents. So, okay, they got the Chinese house. But I'm sorry, when it comes to the documents, yes, they are connected with us. How did the PPS, well, it was the Essex Institute, and how did they get them in the first place? Well, in 1980, they had all been in the Essex County Courthouse, and they finally were getting a new home. And they knew that they could take better care of them at this library. And it was for safekeeping. And one of the things they did after that was they had all sorts of different exhibitions of them. There we go. And also, displays of documents. That was what people wanted to see. Here's another one. Carefully preserved and cataloged. And then also you see things like Cane of George Jacob, Sundial of John Proctor. They really push those. Anytime they do anything with Salem, they put those right out there. So they've been showing these for a long time. 1992, the Tercentenary, they did a big thing, Days of Judgment. There's also a video from 1992 that is really excellent. There aren't too many videos about Salem that I would say it's excellent, but that was really good, and you can get it on DVD now. My original one was on VHS. So really the whole idea on these is original documents being displayed here in Salem. And then even later, Jane Ward actually, she was the curator of manuscripts. She's the one who told me about all the different cataloging systems. She and I were at, we were at the ASP together in 74. Okay. I'm getting a little too intimate. Okay, so anyway, so they were trying to do a lot of these. And then a little while later, they've been in, the reading room had been in Salem, but then they decided in 1998 to go over to Plummer. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And the reading room was wonderful. That's me, that's Bernie Rosenthal from Records of Salem, and that's Marilyn Roach. So we were there working on stuff. And so it was a lovely space. And that's Will Lemoy over on the far left. And he was in charge of the library at that point. And this is a picture that ended up in the newspaper. And they're looking through things. Guess what they're looking through? Wow. Salem documents. Yeah. They're looking through the Salem documents. So of course they did, and the article was all about how they were there. Oh yeah, the director of archives at the Supreme Judicial Court wanted to make sure that people reading the newspaper knew they did not belong to the Peabody Essex. They are not. They do not belong. They're just on deposit, just to be clear. So this is the place in Rowley, and it's a little sterile compared to beautiful things here. And that's my car. I've been there. I actually took the tour that they had, you know. It's really an interesting place, but it was just such a horrible PR thing. But now, as I said, they are in Dorchester at the Massachusetts State Archives in the Judicial Collection. So let's go back in time. Where were these documents? And the first time we really see anything about them is that Cotton Mather, where's my guy? There's my guy. He asked the clerk of the court, Stephen Sewell, if he could have some of the documents to put into his book. Basically, there was a section that was defending how William Stoughton conducted the trials. So they got a whole bunch of documents on the case of George Burroughs, Bridget Bishop, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Martha Carrier. Notably, these are cases where people were hanged, but they really didn't lean on spectral evidence, the controversial spectral evidence. So he's putting it in there. And I've looked through all of his transcriptions, and I've matched them with the documents, and he gave all the documents back. So he did this, but those documents went back to the clerk of the court. Let's jump ahead into the 1700s, and this is, well, he was a little younger there, but this is Hutchinson, who wrote A History of Massachusetts. And he was working on it in the 1760s. And there was the Stamp Act riot. And he was definitely a royalist, supporting the Stamp Act, taxing the locals. And his house, that's his house, was trashed, was absolutely trashed. And he'd had some of the documents in his house, and in his History of Massachusetts, there are a lot of things that he's quoted from original documents, and we don't have those documents anymore. So when I say it was trashed, here's oh, but wait, it gets better. It gets better. Okay, I don't like reading too much, but this is worth it. He wrote a letter to a friend of his, and he said, "The hellish crew fell upon my house with the rage of devils, and in a moment with axes split down the door and entered. Some ran immediately as high as the top of the house, others filled the rooms below, and the cellars. Some ran immediately as high as the top of the house." Oh my God, I already said that line, sorry. "I was obliged to retire." He means run. "I was obliged to retire through yards and gardens to a house more remote, down the road, where I remained until 4 o'clock, by which time one of the best finished houses in the province had nothing remaining but bare walls and floors." As I said, it's worse than that.
Did they burn his furniture or steal it?
What?
Did they burn his furniture or
Oh,
steal
wait,
it?
there's more. There's more. "Not contented with tearing off all the wainscot and hangings and splitting the doors to pieces, they beat down the partition walls, and although that cost them near 2 hours, they cut down the cupola or lantern. And then they began to take the slate and boards from the roof. They were prevented only by the approaching daylight from a total demolition of the building." There's one. "The garden fence was laid flat, and all my trees, etc., broke down to the ground. Besides my plate," he means his silver services and things like that, not silver plate, that's what they called it. "Beside my plate and family pictures, household furniture of every kind, my own, my children, and my servants' apparel, they carried off about 900 pounds sterling in money, and emptied the house of everything whatsoever, except a part of the kitchen furniture," which to me means everything but the kitchen sink. "The furniture in general was cut to pieces," there we go, "before it was thrown out of the house, and most of the beds cut open and the feathers thrown out the windows." So this just doesn't say it well enough. But then he says, "Not leaving a single book or paper in it, and having scattered or destroyed all the manuscripts and other papers I had been collecting for 30 years altogether, besides a great number of public papers in my custody. This is why we don't have the documents that are cited in his book or in the drafts before. So, yeah, and a lot of people think that this is where a lot of the missing documents went. I'll have more on that. So after this, he went to the paper and he took out a whole thing describing all the things they had taken, and he wanted them back. And then also, the stuff, there's the manuscript of his book. And apparently, this does exist. I forget where it is. I don't know. Where was it? Believe it is at the Mass Historical Society. Don't quote me. Sorry. Anyway, but they have this thing, and these drafts actually have footprints on them because they were just trash.
State archives.
State archives. Okay.
I've seen them.
Oh, good. That's cool. Okay. So not Mass. Okay, that makes sense. Anyway, so he wanted that stuff back, and he got a lot of it back, but not all of it. So these are the documents that are are transcribed in his History of Massachusetts. So if we look at just those, we can see the kinds of documents he had. And if you look at them, these are all people in Andover. These are all Andover people. So, okay, the ones he had were only Andover, so he didn't have everything there. Yeah. So what else is missing? We don't know, but we can't just blame it on those rage of devils. So where are the other documents? Major collections that are controlled by the state. So the Essex County Court Archives, I told you that was where we had things that were here in Salem and have been brought down to Dorchester. We have a lot of transcriptions of these done by W. Elliott Woodward, and he published a book in 1860s, sounds about right, don't have a cheat sheet here, and did a lot of transcriptions. But in his Salem Witch Papers, it's only things from the Essex County Court. One of the things they also claim to have, but I could only find the photograph, the Frank Cousins photograph of it, is the pins. But I have not found this little bottle. They're not in the little bottle anymore, which I'll show you in a little bit. But but this isn't that lovely? Yeah. Do a DNA test.
I think that's in the Salem courthouse.
The bottle? Well, the picture is from about 1892, and I have pictures of the pins from later, and they're not in the bottle.
Yeah, well, they are taken out of the bottle and put on a little piece of paper.
Yes. And that's kind
And
of,
that's
where? Oh, wait, I don't know where it
that's
is.
where it is. It's just down the street.
Ah, they still have the pins in the
law
courthouse?
library. In the law library.
Oh, can you get me?
Oh, I don't know anyone there. I'm getting to Yale, but not Salem's too
Okay.
exclusive.
Okay, so they also have the pins are a big deal, because apparently they're poked and they save the pins. You know how these things work. The other place where we have a lot is at the Massachusetts State Archives collection. And it's volume 135. Well, one of the things about the Massachusetts Archives collection, Joseph Felt had been given charge of started organizing all these amazing papers. And the Massachusetts Archives collection, there are 328 volumes. And between 1836 and 1846, he organized 241 of them. And it was all topically. He pulled things all sorts of different places. So we have one that's just witchcraft. And most of them in it are from Salem, but there are some from other witchcraft cases. But these are all topical. And talk about taking things out of context. It would be nice to know where they actually came from. But they also, here we go, conservation. They silked them. This is a detail of a document. Well, at least it kept it intact, but these are all silked, and they're really hard to photograph. And some of the things they silk over the wax seals on them. So it was hard to get them, and the microfilm images of these are terrible. And for a long time, all we had was the microfilm to look at, and it was terrible. Finally, I went down and photographed the whole thing. which was an experience.
And those
But
of us who don't know what silk means.
that's the silk.
Right.
They put a layer of fine silk on either side, and then they put them in the middle of a page, and so you have a piece of paper, you can see the front and back. But that's holding them together, and you can also see the pattern of it in other places. Yeah, how we're gonna get them de-silked? So, and then we have the Suffolk Court Collection. We have a couple of volumes of that where we find most of the Salem papers, and that was put together by John Noble. He was the clerk of the Supreme Judicial Court, and it took him about 25 years. There are 1,248 volumes of Suffolk Court collections, and it was completed about 1908. So he was a powerhouse, but that was the sort of the organization wasn't as great as we'd like, but at least there are all these volumes. So one of the things about how these old papers would be put together. Now this is not Salem stuff, but these are the Inferior Court of Common Pleas in Suffolk. That's how the documents were kept for a long time. And they're all folded to be docketed, so you can look at the docket and see what case it is. But they'd wrap them up in string and have these different things. So that's horrible. It's like, oh yeah. And actually there's still documents. The Essex County Court Archives is larger than the ones just the witchcraft trials. They're just all these files, and they still aren't undocketed, and they're in archival boxes. You know those ones that are black and white and they flip up and stuff? Yeah. Anyway, a lot of the stuff for the Essex County Court Archives are all in that. And that's what they still are. So when we get to these, what do we have in each of these cases? What is where? So in this case, County Court Archives, this is sort of like mother lode. We've got all the good stuff, especially the depositions, some of the examinations. We got the major people who were executed, not George Burroughs in this particular one, strangely. I'll get to that. And the early ones, this is like the mother lode. And there are 319 documents in this particular volume. And what did this volume look like? It looked like this. There are the pins and piece of paper. This is a photograph from, I want to say the 1940s. It was in Life magazine. So they were actually just hinged into books. So it was sort of like, anybody collect stamps? Yeah, you get stamps and you get these little teeny hinges. You sort of you stick it to the stamp and then on the piece of paper. Well, they were hinging them in there too, so you could actually look at them and stuff like that. But people would come and look through them, and Arthur Miller did. This is what he came to see when he was deciding to write the Crucible. So that's what's in Volume 1. Volume 2 has all sorts of other kinds of documents. So this is where you're going to get a few more, but it's in Andover. You're not getting those. So this is later. And then a lot of people who were tried, and some George Burroughs. And then we have these documents that I don't even know why we have a bill from the blacksmith, but we do. And this is where these kinds of bills and very interesting content show up. Also, we have the later documents to pay compensation to people, and that's from later. So they probably just got put with them since they were paid. This is when they were paying. This wasn't when they were asking for compensation, but this is saying, okay, these are the people we're going to give this much money to. Let's work at the volume 135. This collection, we don't have any of the really sexy stuff like the depositions and examinations. And mostly it's stuff that was heard in 1693 when they'd gone to the Superior Court of Judicature. And that's when we get all of that, because that was down in Boston. That went back there. And when we get the recognizance to release children in October, they had to have those in Boston because when they showed up, then the bond would be taken off. And then the petitions for restitution are there, whereas the orders to pay people were in let's see. Oh, and this is what it looked like when I worked with it.
Wow.
Another one of those books, and they're all silk thin. And I had to have it on anybody's. little wedges, and I take a picture this way, and take a picture this way, and had to have my little notes on what everything was. Yeah. However, in 2006, Martha Clark at the archives unbound the volume and then had them microfilmed. Why is it on microfilm? But you can get to this at Family Search. They're not bad. They're high resolution, but still, you know, why didn't they digitize them for real? Although photographic reproduction may give you more details, but it's still. So I was going, oh, couldn't do that before I needed to photograph them. No. When we get down to Suffolk, this has an interesting collection, especially since the indictments, all 93, there are a lot of ignoramus, and what that means, it's not a true bill. The grand jury didn't say it was something they should pursue. And a lot of the things in 1693, the grand juries did reject charges against people. And also examinations and confessions, all these things were 1693. Nothing about the 3 men who were convicted in 1693, but okay, that's in a different place. And then the Rachel Clinton ones, those, when things were erupting in Salem Village, right around that same time, over in Ipswich, there was a case erupting against Rachel Clinton, Rachel Hatfield. So while that gets grouped with the Salem witchcraft trials, it really was sort of very separate. And so those documents ended up there. So we not only had Salem erupting, we had Chelmsford erupting in October of 1691, and we have this other stuff going on in Ipswich. So there was a lot going on around there. It made it a little more credible that it was popping up everywhere. So those are those, and this is what that looked, those Suffolk volumes look like. This I took last summer when I brought a bunch of the people from Endicott College, and they brought out all sorts of stuff for us. I asked for this, they brought it out. And that's how it is. And notice that the edges, a lot of these are papered, just because you want to keep the edges from crumbling. So that's another wonderful conservation tactic that they use. So the other thing that's at down there is the record book from 1693, the Superior Court of Judicature. We do not have a record book extant for the Court of Oyer and Terminer. People have lots of fabulous theories about why we don't. Maybe they didn't have one. No, they had one. That's how they did things. And also, they needed it later on for reparations. Because we have records that people spent money going to the clerk of the court to get a copy of their case, and it would have had to come out of that record book. People say, well, maybe they destroyed it. They were so ashamed. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. People weren't ashamed of it. They wanted to, because we talk a lot about shame in a different way that they did in the 17th century. I mean, confession of your sins and apologies and things like that were really part of a social thing. So they may have said, but they wouldn't have destroyed that. Personally, I think it's much more common that it might have fallen apart because it was going to all the different counties for those courts. And I think somewhere in there, it probably didn't hold up. I would love to have a page of it appear somewhere. But this particular one, it was transcribed by Noble, and the whole thing is much easier to read here. But turns out they didn't know where the original record book was. I mean, I showed you a picture of the page. Remember? They later on they tried to microfilm it, but we had the content. So I don't know where the book is. So imagine my surprise when in 1996 there was this story, this record book found in an old filing cabinet, and I'm going, Court of Oyer Terminer, Court of Oyer Terminer. But it turned out to be the Superior Court of Judicature, and they never really put it back. They just put it in some old filing cabinet. So yeah, I wish. So these guys, you see a nice bunch of old men with a lot of facial hair. Wow. This guy, cool. So these guys are antiquarians. And they were really invested in finding lots of stuff about our colonial heritage, the history of being Americans and what was going on. And they were invested in the Salem witchcraft trials. So let me take you here. This is where we have the Phillips Library. And there, they had 31 documents. Well, actually, one was not witchcraft, that's okay. They had 31 documents. And how did they get these documents? They were gifts. They were gifts from antiquarians or their children. So that's how they acquired this little collection. And just so you know, Peabody Essex has given those documents to the state since then, even though they had them from different places. Pickmans, White, Fowler, Goodell, all these different people. One of the things about this collection that's kind of interesting is there are nine documents, 9 depositions against Sarah Wiles. Maybe somebody had saved those, gave them in some group, because we do find little groupings in different cases. And these of course have been microfilmed. This was done in 1982. Part of the thing of moving the documents from the courthouse to the Essex Institute. And this was done over in Andover. The NEDCC did it. They did a whole lot of stuff. They did all the documents that were going over there. So, but I want to point out something. This is one of the documents that was given by Mr. Pickman. And notice again that there is paper around the edges. So I try and look and see how do they conserve things. You know, what gets conserved the same way. The Abner Goodell one. This is the jail. And of course, they had tours of this and billed it. You could actually see the document for the bill of what the jail keeper was asking. Also, one of the documents that they have is actually 10 sheets, 20 pages of this. And these are copies of the interrogations of the people in Andover, most of which, there's only 1 or 2, but they confessed. And we don't really know what this document is, how it was used. It doesn't seem to have been used legally. And you see on the edges, it looks like they were bound together at some point. We don't know what function this served. But it's really interesting. We have some of the original documents of the individual examinations, but there are copies in here of things we do not have an original. So if one, Dick Trask said, this is the $1 million document. And apparently he said, 1 page of something would go for $100,000. And this has 10 sheets of paper, so it's $1 million document. That's pretty good. Other places that have the Mass Historical Society. This one still looks pretty much like that. And they have an interesting assortment. They have 46 documents there. And, okay, so Judge John Pickering of Salem, not the one in New Hampshire who was impeached. He was very careful, isn't he? Not the one in New Hampshire. So he gave them to Nathaniel Bowditch, and this is the guy. There's a polymath. Everybody know who Bowditch is? Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So he gave all this pile. This judge in Salem gave a pile of these things to him. And then his son, Nathaniel Ingersoll Bowditch, gave them to the Mass Historical Society about a year after his father's death. Actually, he didn't give it. Charles Dean, one of those antiquarians, delivered them. And also, they transcribed a whole bunch of them. But, I'm going to go back just briefly here. There are all these documents, but, there we go. George Burroughs, there's a big cache of George Burroughs documents. So the ones where I said we don't have the George Burroughs, that's in the Essex Volume 1. And these probably were extracted from there by this judge. And there are transcriptions of them from 1860. So actually there are 4 indictments against George Burroughs. And this set included 3, but they only put 1 in. And then there are a couple of others. And the 4th one showed up in the Essex Institute as one of those gift ones. So who gave it? Somebody pulled them out. Let's go down to Boston. This is the original BPL. It was was replaced with the one we have now in Copley Square. This is the original one, built in 1855, and then the new one was built in 1895, I believe. So they had a bunch of things. So the librarian from 1878 to 1890 was Mellon Chamberlain. And he was somebody who really was another one of those antiquarians. Anytime he could get any kind of document. So he had 27 documents. Now, it was interesting because they're not just like out there, they're not in their own books. When I found out what happened to them, I was just like, he had special editions of Upham's Salem Witchcraft, which is a 2-volume thing. Let's see, here it is. There they are, 2 volumes of it, and volume 1, volume 2, but they're really, really fat. And this is what it says, illustrated with portraits and autographs. He had the 2 volumes taken apart, and then he had the documents silked and tipped them into the book, and then had them rebound. Now, it wasn't just Salem documents, all the things that he was collecting. So this is just like, what? And I know a little bit about it, and we found more, but here it is, there's one that's tipped in. There are a couple more. Obviously, they broke the wax seals off of them to do this. So this is interesting. Just before I gave this talk at History Camp, the night before, the Boston Public Library gave me all these, they digitized the whole thing, and I said, oh, great! So that's how I got all these pictures, the night before I gave this talk the first time. But this really gives you an idea of what these folks were doing. Now, also at the Boston Public Library, they have 16 documents from a Goodspeed book catalog from 1938. And these were from an auction at Park Bernay. And this one has multiple cases of John Willard in its collection. So who was auctioning them off in 1938? Oh, William Randolph Hearst was the head of it. And he came up with all these things. And it includes, let me go back, there we go. It includes one of the warrants to execute people. Of the 4, actually 5, warrants that existed, we only have 2 of them. And this is one of them. William Randolph Hearst had. So those got auctioned off. And they ended up at the Boston Public Library. So that's interesting. Also, in the history of Rowley, there are a bunch of documents that are transcribed in the case of Margaret Scott. And we have a few of them. We have some in the Essex stuff, the Essex files, but we also have 2 that are out there that get auctioned off periodically. But there were still 5 that we didn't know where the original documents were. And they were at the Boston Public Library. They did not know. This was back before they closed for a while and redid things. It was a good thing. Remember, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a Rembrandt and a Dürer that had gone missing, and heads rolled on that one. It was front page. But we found them in the card catalog because we were looking, and 2 of my colleagues from Records of Salem Witch Hunt and I were looking for different things, and pulled out a card in the card catalog, 4 documents in the case of Margaret Scott of Rowley, and we went, well, there are only 9 documents. Could this be 4 more? No, it turned out to be 4 of those 5. And we were taking pictures, stuff like that, and Peter went back about a week later, because we've been doing this big thing, going to all these places to look at documents, and asked to see them again, and they couldn't find them. And we knew, right around that same time, one of those Margaret Scott documents was coming up for auction. It was that week. And we were going, who else was in the room? Stuff like that, and they couldn't find them. And, well, we'll tell you when we find them. It's sort of like, about a month later, I called, and they still hadn't found them, and they were a little testy. And I must have had a day off and was bored. So I contacted a friend of mine who used to work at the BPL, and I said, okay, who should I be talking to? The next person up the chain, I gave the name, I said, how about her? Yeah, she's a bitch, she'd be good at it. Okay, so I contacted her, and she said, oh, really? And that afternoon, she called me back and said, they're on my desk right now. They had been misfiled. Somebody just had to put it back. And then all that stuff with the Rembrandt and the Durr, that story came out, I went, they're misfiled. And lo and behold, when they found them, they were 80 feet from where they were supposed to be, and I just laughed. And I'll probably never be liked by the Boston Public Library again, but I called the reporter in the Boston Globe and said, I wasn't surprised, I told them about it. And that was the lead in the story on the page. Okay, but I mean, losing Salem witchcraft documents. People get Rembrandt, Durr, I don't care. Oh, Salem. So, okay, I digress. That's me. Okay, the Lenox Library in New York, this is predecessor to the New York Public Library. They had some, not a whole lot of them, but in this case, there was an auction of the contents of Drake's library. And that one, there are a bunch of things, you see the witchcraft papers, so all these documents, and the New York Public Library got them. And then also these for Elizabeth Morse, Harvard got them. You can go see them. And also there's this one, the Examination of Hugh Parsons. I don't know who got that one, but that's another witchcraft one in there. So the reason they got them, and then they got those, and then they got a few others. And these are being shopped around by a manuscript dealer. And these are the ones that ended up going to Lenox Library. But this stuff at the top and that letter, those are stuff that he sent to the American Antiquarian Society, trying to sell them to them. And I believe they're asking $300 a piece for them. Woo! $350. But they didn't end up buying them, and the Lenox Library did. Now, there are a lot of other people who've gone through documents, and this is WPA. At the Mass Archives, they have the drafts of all the work that they did. So you can see all the things they were changing around. I believe the actual typescript, there are 2 copies of it, one and a carbon. One, I believe, is at the Phillips Library, and the other is down in Dorchester. But they did a lot of work that helped us a great deal. And it was a big deal. It was a big deal. Here they have these WPA transcripts, and now they're saying they're going to publish them. And here's the clerk, the court saying, "Oh, look, here are the pins." So this made, and they were going to do 1 volume, I think, but of course it ended up being Salem Witchcraft Papers and 3 volumes, and it took a lot longer. And of course we get Boyer and Nissenbaum, who were doing these things, and their book came out. They were doing revolutionary stuff in teaching history by looking at the greater community and looking at the accusers rather than the accused. And it was really revolutionary. John Demos called it a big idea. That was when Ben Ray and Dick Latner were taking apart the data and saying, no, Boyer and Nissenbaum's conclusions don't hold up, and John Demos was there and he wasn't happy. Yeah. But these guys really emphasize primary sources. And I know somebody who was actually in the class. I thought that was awesome. I'm talking about, I took that class. That's at UMass Amherst. So as we've gone along, here's Ben Ray, and he has this site at the University of Virginia. He has since retired, and I have some concerns about who is going to maintain that site. When it's one person doing things and they're no longer there. And all the stuff I have online, my brother, I go, what are you going to do about that? You're younger than I am, but this is a very helpful site. Although all the things that the Phillips Library had that they sent to Boston, Dorchester, they did beautiful digital scans of all of them. And at their website, you can see these beautiful scans. So that's sort of, he has the older ones that we were using. So there's a lot more stuff in better shape if you want to see images of them. And then of course there's our book. As Bernie Rosenthal, my dear friend, who is 90 years old now. And he thought we could just go through and correct the mistakes that were in Salem Witchcraft Papers. And it would take 2 or 3 years. And he and Ben got together for National Endowment for the Humanities grant, blah, blah, blah. But here we are. It took us 10 years. There were 12 of us, and it took 10 years because of these people. although that is me, and that's Bernie. And all the rest of them are Finnish linguists, half a dozen of them, and they are very interested in actually what's written, and they look at everything. That's why the book is as painfully detailed as it is. Where is she? Miria. Miria. Everything has to be perfect. We just have one chance to do it, you know. Okay, but it still took us a very long time. Most people don't know about these books, but this is our linguist team. I have a master's in linguistics, so I understood what they were talking about. Bernie didn't care. He just wanted them to work a little faster. But I'm sort of at that pivot point between them. There are other documents that we don't have, and this includes this particular negative photostat. And this one, when they have all their things microfilmed, but when I opened up that book, this fell out. And I went, oh, what is this? If you know the documents visually, I'm going, oh, that's something that Samuel Paris did, it's an interrogation. And actually, we already had that document, but not the real thing. This is a negative photostat. And the positive photostat was at the Mass Historical Society. So a lot of people, if they had an interesting document, they would bring it in their 1920s or before, so that people could get a copy of it. Who knows where the actual thing is? We don't, but we get that. We see a lot of other things getting advertised in the good bookseller catalogs. And this one, we only had a picture from the catalog, but Dick Trask tracked it down, and it's in Michigan. So that was pretty cool. We also, here we go, this is my Yale slide. This document, which is an indictment of Mary English, which was returned ignoramus. They didn't return. So I don't know how they got this. It's in, get this, the Betsy Beinecke Shirley Collection of American Children's Literature. That's the collection it's in. Now, remember I said there was a whole section that were indictments, the returned ignoramus? We know where this was poached from. So we've got that one. Then Cornell has one. And this is one that just is so poignant. It's William Good talking about what he lost. And he talks about his wife being executed. She was breastfeeding at the time, and the infant died before she was executed, and little Dorothy Good is mentioned in here. This is just one of the more poignant documents in the whole thing, and Cornell has it. They bought it, of course, from Goodspeeds in 1913 for $35. And they sold it to this man, George Burr, who you probably know from this fabulous book on the witchcraft cases. And he goes more than Salem, but he got this thing. There's also another one going around that is really amazing because it's getting George Corwin and getting things set up, and it's signed by Stoughton and Sewell, two of the judges. And Bernie went to, the guy who had it, his name was Karpelis in Santa Barbara. And Bernie actually went up to Santa Barbara. She had family in the area, okay? So this guy let him in. And he has this manuscript library, but let him in, but it was sort of like, okay, you want to make sure who he was. And when Bernie finally got in, right next to the collector, there's a guy in a black suit. He said, you couldn't make this up. There's a guy in a black suit who handed him a folder. And Bernie's there, and the guy's looking through the folder and asking him questions about, where he went to school, all this stuff. He'd had a background check done on Bernie. And then brought this out for Bernie to look at, and Bernie was deciding that, yeah, it was legit. It has since been sold. It was in there, and I heard from somebody in 2017, Evan Holzwasser had bought it from Karpelis, and he wanted to make sure to tell me so that everything showed that he owned it. It was just like, I'll tell Ben. But it's one that's gone around. We have no idea how much he paid for it. We also have some other things that came up for auction. This is one of the art things in Margaret Scott's case, and that sold for $26,000. Yeah. In 2012, which is sort of like, oh, okay, that's one, and that's what's happening when our other documents were not found that same week. And it turns out that these two documents that pop around, they were from the Eric Karen collector. And we go, what?
My father knew him. I know
He would buy and sell, he would.
him. I know him very well.
Yeah, he had these two Margaret Scott documents, and they would come up, sometimes
Yeah,
he'd sell them and
he
stuff
showed
like
them
that.
to me
Cool,
when I was a boy.
cool, well, he knew what he had, but he got $26,000 for one of them. So, and a collector since the age of 7, I copy and paste things into this. So this is one of his rarest treasures. Anyway, he was putting those things up. Finding out who is selling and who is buying is a hard thing, because auctioneers, people auctioning things, and auctioneers don't really want to let you know. Because if they know, oh, you have that, so he showed it to me. Ooh. Okay, so then this was another one in Margaret Scott. It was at auction at 2017, and it went for, anybody have any guesses? Now, this is a deposition. This isn't, and indictments are just like chump change. This is a deposition against her. $137,000. And that probably doesn't even include the buyer's premium. I don't know if any of you go to auctions, but you bid, let's say I'm gonna bid $1,000 for something, and then the auctioneer has a special thing added on. It can be 10%, 20%, whatever. You also have to pay the buyer's premium. So this was not what they paid. There was a lot more. So things come up. Those two documents pop around. We see them every once in a while. The William Reese Company had them at one point. So it's just like, okay, can we get pictures of them? We don't know who owns them. The Reese Company got them for us. But then they started showing up. Now, am I going over? Oh, I'm doing okay. I tend to talk. So, are there any other documents popping up?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, very good. Okay, so what are those documents? 2023 was a banner year for stuff showing up. Okay, I heard from Dan Howlett, who's a graduate student at George Mason University, and he found this. And this is in the Phillips Library in some documents with the Wilds family. And it looks a little odd. It's a copy, a 19th century copy, and see the date down here. It says 1739, but it's talking about Sarah Wilds. And she's his grandmother. And there's something about that dark time, trying to get compensation or something else like that. And he contacted me and said, what do you think this is? And I didn't know. It took me a while to, first I looked at it. If you look at the last documents in Records of the Salem Witch Hunt, there's a lot of stuff that was going on in the 1730s. There's another document in there that's really kind of curious. We couldn't figure out why it was there. Another one from 1750. It turns out that in 1738 and 39, a committee had been put together to hear from families about what they had lost, as in losing their family member. And they were going to look into what to do about that. The committee had never met, but people were preparing things for it. Now, the guy who was in charge of it, the director of this whole committee, was Judge Samuel Danforth, who you probably don't know, except his great uncle was William Stoughton. So there was an effort that he was included in to try and get some compensation. But this was just in stuff that he came across. He was looking for something entirely different and went, whoa, what's this? That was in June. In August, right around the time I think I was doing this talk, this document showed up. It's another indictment. And apparently this woman found this in some family papers. I have no idea why they had it. But look at that. Also, that one says ignoramus. Guess which file that came out of? That was coming out of those Suffolk court collections, like that other one with Mary English. So Ben Ray found out about it, and the woman said she would be giving it to the Mass State Archives. I don't know that that's happened. I hope so, because that's where it belongs. Also, here we go in October, recently, another document came up for auction. In the examination of Margaret Prince. Oh my God, it's an examination. But we had already seen it, whoops. We had already seen it for sale. We already had a transcription of it, because again, Goodspeed booksellers. And they were offering it for $85. So that's what we had, and this showed up for auction. So it was sort of like somebody bought it then and probably went down to the family and said, hey, we got something good, let's auction it. And I didn't have the stones to go all the way on it. It sold for $12,000. Wait, plus a 28% buyer's premium. So that was at least another $3,000 beyond that. So it's like, these don't come up very often, but there it is. And then, I said 2023, that's the third one. In December, Dan Howlett, the same guy who found the one on Sarah Wilde's, came up with this document in the Suffolk Court Files, but in volume 212. And again, you can see the tape around the edges. And this is the testimony of Timothy Swan, the guy who died, accusing Ann Foster. I mean, this is an amazing, amazing document. And there it is, just sitting in the Suffolk Court Files. It's just that when they found it, they just sort of added it to the files. We would not have found that except for somebody going through document after document. He was looking for something about, I think he was researching disability in that thing. So he really had to be looking for all these documents and found this. And I went, oh, great. That's 4 things that had come to light in 2023. So I'm thinking there's more that could come out. So I'm going to end with this a little bit. That document, the William Good document that was bought for, what, $35 in 1913. When I was looking at the Cornell online directory, all these things, the catalog, I went down and it said, and two, in the folder it said this document, and 2 letters. What's that? I contacted them, and it turns out they had 2 letters written to Burr by George Dow from the Essex Institute. They had 2 letters about this document. I went, oh. So then I contacted the Phillips Library. I said, do you have like institutional records of correspondence, stuff like that? Sure enough, they had 2 documents that Burr had sent to Dow. So I have 4 documents, stuff. And let me see, do I have anything? In this one, and you can't really read his handwriting especially well. Great for antiquarian to have terrible handwriting. But he says, the document seems undoubtedly genuine, original, and I am puzzled as to how it escaped from public keeping. Unless there's a public claim, it seemed to me better with us than in more private hands. Okay. And then, of course, Dow wrote back, and I'm like, you gotta read this. I'll let you read it for yourself. Yeah. Yeah. He mentions our friend Mellon Chamberlain. They're actually 27. But this is an indictment of people poaching things from the public record. And that's part of the reason I was going through these things. The ones that were out there, where did they come from? Oh, people just went into the Suffolk Court Files and took them. And then that judge took things out of the Essex Court things. And in 1913, they knew. They knew they belonged at the State House. So Cornell isn't going to like me either. Because I'm going to send these to my friend Christopher Carter at the archives. I'm going to send them to these. I said, these people who talked about this document knew that it belonged to the state, and I think you should go claim it. So anyway, that's my lovely friend Christopher Carter, who is just a charming person, and I am grateful to all archivists. And it was just, here he is in this. But it was really wonderful. So, anyway, thank you for listening to me.